Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Today I want to I want to start a series on what we call cults. Now, that's going to be on the major cults in the United States. And you say, why do I do that? Well, to understand what America really believes and what Christianity here is all about, you have to know what some of these other offshoots of Christianity or these other religious beliefs in America believe. There's all kinds of cults, and the definition is not really that obvious. There's several ways to define cult in the United States. We can apply it to religious belief, and that's where I want to start. There's all kinds of cults. You have the political cult in Washington, and to understand that cult, you'll be able to understand their foreign policy and what they do around the world. But that is a cult, considered a cult by the term cult, definition of cult. So believe that there's all kinds of definitions for the word cult, but we're basically going to be using it in the religious sense, and we're going to look at it from that point of view. I can give you about 3 different definitions of it, and I'm going to add a little bit into it on each one. But one definition is a system of religious beliefs and its adherents, those that believe in that. Now, a system of religious beliefs, that could be anything. I mean, you could call the Catholics a cult, even though in the United States they're not really called a cult. But you could, by this definition, call them a cult. You could call the Baptists a cult. You could call any other religious group a cult of believers, because all of these adherents to that belief. All right? So these beliefs that they believe could be possibly unorthodox and spurious. Now, these are the ones that most Christians would look at, and I say Christians, I mean like mainline Christians. That would be your Baptists, and that would be all the other groups, except a few that would deem these others, because they have some other beliefs, they would deem them as being in a cult. Now, it's interesting. It's very interesting to find who is in a cult and who's not in a cult, and who believes that they're not following the way they should be. But anyway, it could be some unorthodox or spurious teachings, okay? Some false teachings. Now, often for a cult, often they're devoted to a strong, charismatic leader or a group of leaders. Now, this body or group is in total charge. They set the rules, they tell you what you can do and what you can't do, and usually it's pretty rigorous, and we're going to get into those points. But often in the United States, when you say cult, it's in a derogatory sense. I'm calling somebody a cultist. Some of the right-wing, ultra-right-wing, progressive, we don't call them liberals anymore, they're progressives. I mean, they're beyond liberal. But they would call the MAGA group, the MAGAs that wear the red hats and follow Trump right to the end and still believe he should be president. They would call those a cult. They would call that the MAGA cult. And it's in a derogatory term. It's in a derogatory sense. It doesn't have a good meaning to it. Okay, they usually attack these groups by differing in doctrine. That's one of the main key characteristics. You're a cult because you don't believe what I believe. And it's usually on some of the main doctrines. It's not on the excuse me. It's not on the minor things. It's usually on some major issues, like the personhood of Christ. Is he God? Is he man? These kinds of things. Some of these groups would say, well, no, Jesus is just a prophet, or Jesus was a teacher, or he was a rabbi, but he wasn't God. And well, you're a cult immediately. by Christians, you're a cult. You don't believe what I believe, you got to be believing that's a cult. Okay? Now, it even goes so far as that one scholar had made a statement that, and he defined cult as any doctrine I don't like. If I don't like it, that's a cultish doctrine. That was his definition of it. So you got all kinds of definitions of cult. And to understand it, you got to know in the context that it's being used. So you got to keep that in mind. It's in English, there's a lot of different ways to use a phrase or a word. Some of it's good, and some of it could be bad. Some of it could be in a derogatory sense, in a negative sense. So you have to understand that. Now, there's all kinds of groups. There's all kinds of groups that we would call cults. Some are dangerous. Let me give you a few examples of that. If you've been around as long as I have, and probably a lot of you haven't, but because I look at my analytics and most of you are below the age of 40. But if you've been around any length of time or you've listened to the media, you've heard of names like Heaven's Gate. Remember that group? I'm not going to mention the leader's name. I don't think it's relevant. He's not relevant as far as I'm concerned. But he was in tune with the aliens, the spaceship that was circling the earth or something or another. And the only way to go up there and join these people was to actually commit suicide. So they all got their best clothes on, their Reeboks. They all dressed up like they were going somewhere out to dinner or something. And I think they poisoned themselves. And they were all in their beds, you know what I'm saying? These are extreme cults. You often say, well, how do they get that? How do they get that way? Well, it's an indoctrination process, and I'll talk a little bit about that process, but it's not, it's not just like that overnight. Now you believe everything we believe, and you're a total believer. It's a little bit at a time, a little bit over several months, and it gets more and more and more until you actually don't understand what's going on and what's happening to you. All right. I think of the experiment where they put a frog, and it was kind of a cruel experiment, but they put a frog in a bucket of water, and they gradually turned the temperature up on the water a little bit each day until the frog actually had no alternative. It was cooking in the water, and he didn't try to get out until the end, and then it was already too late. And that's the way these cults operate. Very few people that are indoctrinated in cults ever get out of them. There's been some instances where family members have forcibly went in and took the individual out, and they have to go through a process of deprogramming that person because of all the nonsense that they've been believing. There's a lot of different ones. So Jim Jones, I don't know if you remember that guy in Guyana, where they all took the poison, the Kool-Aid, and they all died. Jim Jones was a charismatic speaker, a very strong personality. He would tell them what to believe, and it was usually marked by everyone being in a commune of some kind. Okay, so that's one of the characteristics of a cult. So there's many more. Scientology, you heard of all the horror stories, some of these lately of Scientology, where you don't hear about the common people, but when somebody like John Travolta or somebody of some stature or movie star gets wrapped up into it and realizes that it's a cult and tries to get out after losing most of their money and whatever else, or psychological damage that was done to them, that's a cult. And that's considered a dangerous cult. Okay. There's some other that are considered cults that are not so dangerous, and you often wonder if they're even a cult. You know, they just believe something different. And I'm thinking right now about Mormons. Mormons have some of the characteristics of a cult, without a doubt, but don't seem to be dangerous. They say that there's some psychological programming of children. They follow polygamy. There's some other problems with them, but they don't seem to be dangerous to society in a whole. Some of these other cults could be, like Scientology and some of those other ones, could be very dangerous if that philosophy was to catch on, you know. So you got the Seventh-day Adventists, they're considered a cult. Jehovah's Witness is considered a cult. Now we're going to look at some of the psychological structures of these, and just why I call them a cult and why they're called a cult. Some of the psychological things would be the close-mindedness of the adherents, and the teaching that no matter how dangerous the teaching is, somehow or another it's explained away and followed. Now I can't stress enough the strong charismatic leadership of these cults, and usually all these cults would have some teaching that's believable, mixed in with a lot of the teaching that's really crazy, but there's some of it that's believable. And when I say that, I mean some of them take their teaching from the Bible, and we could go over that for many, many days, weeks, months. That, you know, some of that you could build anything you wanted by taking some verses and cobbling them together from the Bible. We know that because if you'll watch some of my other videos, you'll see just how it's been done in the past. So they have some foundation for what they believe, even though it's not acceptable by most mainline individuals, and it's not probably what most would want to believe or follow. Okay. Usually, the elevation of a leader or a group of leaders. These are signs of a cult. The elevation of a single person, a charismatic leader, one that controls the entire show. He tells everyone what they can do, what they can't do, and this is one of the characteristics of a cult. Now, that one, there's a lot of pastors of churches. There's a lot of pastors in churches that are in that same position. Some Southern Baptist churches, I think of W.A. Criswell. W.A. Criswell was an authoritarian leader. What he said went in that church, and everybody followed what he said. Or you didn't make it there and you had to leave. In that sense, you could have called him a cult leader. It could have been the cult of Criswell. A lot of people followed him in life and actually followed him in death, reading his books and material and literature on various topics. So, in a sense, he was a cult leader. More of a benign leader. You weren't going to take Kool-Aid and kill yourself. I mean, you know, poison Kool-Aid and kill yourself. That wasn't what he was advocating. Okay, so some of this stuff is the teaching is not that radical, that radical at all. But there's a close-minded intolerance. That's my point. That's number 3, actually. Close-minded intolerance. You either believe what we believe, or you find a new place to go. Now, if you want to be part of this group, you'll believe what we believe, and you'll try to understand what we believe. And if it resonates with you, and you become one of us, part of this body, well, that's great. Otherwise, you're going to have to leave, because there's an intolerance, because we're right, and I don't care about your opinion. If I'm an authoritarian leader, I don't care about it at all. You just leave. Now you get my idea. You get the drift here, eh? On what it's like. Another key factor of a cult is the isolationism of it. I'm thinking of David Koresh, who was an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists. And he was out in Waco, Texas. You remember they used to say the wackos from Waco and all that kind of stuff, Well, David Koresh had a group of people, maybe 200 or 300 families, maybe a little more. And they all lived on this farm-type institution, and they grew their own food, and they had some various ways to raise money, and some of them were selling weapons, and they were all legal sales of weapons, but that was one of the things that was held against them, that they had weapons in there, and he was crazy, and he was manipulating people, and these kinds of things were said. But they were in isolation. They weren't out in the public. They weren't where you could find them on the street corner with a cup and begging, like the Moonies. Remember, I don't know if you ever remember this group of people. They used to be hanging around the airports, and when you'd land, they'd want to give you some literature, and they want to solicit a donation from you. Well, they were out in public, and that group seemed to fade away with the Reverend Sun Myung Moon there. He was a cult leader for sure. But they usually, number 5, they want to isolate you from your family and friends. Because to really indoctrinate you, we have to control what you're listening to and who you're listening to. Okay? So we want to keep you away from your family that's telling you, hey, that's a cult. Or your friends who might say, they're a cult. You got to get out of there. So isolationism from your family and friends is another key way to do it. I often think today, in our news media is put together by people that know propaganda. They're propagandists. I mean, they can push one view and suppress another. They can get you to believe one thing and suppress anything else that's negative. So you only believe that view. And why? If you don't believe me, just take and turn on the different news media organizations. Fox Media is going to have a whole different view than MSNBC. Every time. They're going to be a far extreme. Some of the ABC, CBS, the Cartoon Network, CNN, they're in the middle, you know what I'm saying? But and sometimes they swing both ways. But and then there's the private news portals that we watch today on YouTube and things. Is all that information true and factual, and should we believe it all? I think you'd be in real trouble if you did. And I think a lot of people are. And I think that's what's wrong with our country today. They're listening to the wrong voices. And they're listening to propaganda. Okay, so get you away from everybody. That's one way. And classify everyone else as non-believers. Another thing is, not only are you encouraged to be in a commune, to be a communist, not a communist, but anyway, a communist, living in a commune with a whole lot of other people, you're encouraged to get rid of your wealth. Wealth is the big problem, see. You can't have some higher on the economic scale than others and live in a commune. Some of them couldn't be slurping honey and nectar, and some other ones eating a dandelion salad. You see what I'm saying? So you all have to be on the same level. And to do that, we have to get rid of your wealth. And usually that wealth is turned over to the organization. Okay? And it's administered by, guess who? The one in charge, or the people in charge, the leader. That charismatic leader is usually the one that winds up with all the cookies. Now that is a key point of a cult. All right? So I'm giving you some of the things that a cult would be. And when we start to study some of these cults, whether it's Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, Jehovah's Witness, or whatever these so-called cults are, I want you to start to think about these things. Maybe go back, copy these points down, and try to apply them to these so-called cults. and see how many of them apply, and see if they really are cults, or do they just teach something different, and that's why they're labeled as cults. Because to an organization that teaches one thing, if you teach something different, you're a threat. And the best way to deal with a threat is to call them a cult. Okay? That's the best way. That religion's a cult. No, no one's going to listen to it then, if you're successful in doing that. Okay, turning over your resources. Another one could be uniform dress. I'm thinking of Heaven's Gate now. You know, every one of those persons were dressed in white. Just about every one of them were wearing Reebok shoes. It was like a uniform. And that was, so everyone is the same. We're all the same. There's no more individualism. We're just one group, one body. We're all the same. That's a key characteristic of a cult, my friends. And you got to be careful of these things. Even if you're not, you know, even if you don't believe in Islam, you know, and you don't believe in Christianity, and maybe you run across this video some other kind of way, believe this, that if you're involved in some of these groups that have these characteristics, you're probably in a cult, and you probably need to get out of there as fast as you can. Okay. Uniform dress. There's another one, and that's unusual dependence on the leader. I'm going to say that one again. Unusual dependence on the leader. I noticed when I was a pastor, if somebody had a question, usually if that question was a religious question, they would come to you. If it was something from the Bible or something, they would depend on you to answer that. And that wouldn't be unusual. All right? But if they would call you up in the afternoon and ask you what they should cook for dinner, I think that would be unusual, right? To depend on the pastor for that kind of information. Because number one, that's out of his realm to begin with, I mean, in family matters like that. But this is what these individuals have. They have an unusual dependence on the person that's in charge. You know, it's something, and I like the idea when I started coming to mosque and started to study Islam and learn Islam. And not always, the mosque that I attended not always had a imam, all right? They didn't have anybody in charge on Friday leading the prayer. So consequently, what they would do is they would try to grab somebody who was knowledgeable, hopefully, put him up there to do the khutbah and to lead the prayer. And I thought that was interesting, because if you were going to a Baptist church and you didn't have a pastor, you pretty much didn't have a service. If you were charismatic and you didn't have that charismatic leader, and everybody was there, you pretty much didn't have a service. It turned into a prayer or something like that. But you pretty much didn't have, you know, a sermon and all the other things that go along with it. So I thought that was interesting, that you could actually conduct worship service without this designated leader every week. And that would mean that it would be pretty hard for one person to be in charge of everything that way. You know what I'm saying? Because it really didn't make a whole lot of difference if he was there or not. I mean, it did in one sense. You would get better teaching if you had an imam that was trained. But if you didn't have one, you could still worship. So I think you get what I'm saying with this, right? So this unusual dependence on a group or a leader, that's one of the key characteristics of a cult. And we covered the communal. We covered the communal living. That would be another characteristic. You know, selling everything you have and living in a commune, and might be a cool idea back in the '60s when you were 20 years old, but now that you're 60 or 65, it doesn't sound like too good of an idea. You know what I'm saying? So I can't stress enough, though, each one of these cults that are considered cults have a figurehead. Now, you know, when I think of a lot of them today, you know, I think of they all have this one charismatic leader. And this is the guy that, you know, leads them out of wherever they were and this life that they were in to a new and better life on the horizon. And friends, this is the characteristics of cults. I would say that you really need to evaluate, if you're inside of one of these things, you need to evaluate what I'm telling you, and you make your own decision. I can't make that for you. You know, we always say, whomever Allah guides can't be misguided. If Allah is guiding you, you can't be misguided. And whoever He allows to be misguided can't be guided. So there's nothing I can say, there's nothing anybody can say that can lead you out of there. It has to be between you and Allah, or between you and God. Well, I hope that you got something out of this short, brief video. We're going to have a series on cults, and I'm going to do that series, like I said, so a lot of you people in the West, a lot of you Muslim brothers and sisters that are living in the West here, can understand who you're working with and what they believe, and you can understand what's the definition of a cult, and are they a cult. And you know, strangely and oddly enough, we're considered a cult. You know, Muslims are considered a cult. We used to be called Mohammedans years ago. They finally dropped that name. I don't hear that being used too much today. That was something in the past 30, 40 years ago, but no one's really calling Muslims Mohammedans now. They're calling us jihadists. They're calling us terrorists. These are the terms that took over, and it's because of the media, all right? It's because of the propagandists. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know, give me a thumbs down. I mean, it keeps me alert. Write a comment. I enjoy your comments. I'm sure other people enjoy those comments as well. And if you want to follow me on YouTube, and I hope you do, you can subscribe. So you have a wonderful day, inshallah. May God bless you. May Allah keep you and guide you, and may He protect you and your family. Assalamu alaikum.